People are like, well, how do I know if I'm caring or controlling? I'm like, well, let's start with taking a resentment inventory, because your resentment is like an absolute gem of a GPS to bring you to where something needs your attention in your life.
Toxic relationships push survivors into way too much emotional labor. To talk about this, Terri Cole, author and expert of codependency, who just recently released a new book called Too Much, is joining me to talk about what happens inside these relationships that cause us to overfunction. Thank you so much, Terri Cole, for joining me today. And I just recently came across your book, Too Much. I love that title. We hear that constantly, how much work too much. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in the topic of boundaries, codependency, what happens in toxic relationships.
Well, what do they say? You teach what you most need to learn. So for me, I was a boundary disaster, and I was highly codependent in my relationships, although I didn't know either one of those terms at that point in my life. And through the therapeutic process, I came to discover for myself that, a lot of my unhappiness in my relationships, I really thought it was other people, because you know how it is. I was like, if my boyfriend just wasn't a jerk, or my boss didn't do this, or my best friend, of course, then I had a great therapist who was like, hello, you're the common denominator of all of those relationships, so it might be you, which is very helpful to find out it's you, because if it's you, then you can do something about it. So I think that every single thing that I write about and everything I'm very passionate about teaching about are all things that caused me great pain in my life. And I really, my goal, my dharma is to help other people lessen their own suffering and elevate their own joy. And I feel like I do that very specifically with the books that I write.
Very cool. So let's dig into your definition of codependency, what you sort of discovered through your own journey, but what you're also seeing in other people as you work with them. Define what you sort of see as the codependent relational style.
Well, for me, I'll give you my definition of codependency, but what I was seeing in my practice, right? I have very highly capable, competent women in general as my practice. I don't know, alpha females, maybe you'd call them. And if I were to say to them, oh, hey, what you're talking about, that's a codependent pattern in that relationship, they would immediately reject the notion of codependency. Immediately, like, no way. And they're like, everyone's dependent on me. I'm making all the money. I'm making all the moves. I'm doing all the emotional labor. What are you talking about? I'm not dependent on squat, which you know. And it made me realize my clients don't know what codependency actually is. And I feel like there was a lack of information out there, even though we had Codependent No More by Melody Beattie, rest in peace. And, this was the seminal text for forever and ever. I was like, it's got a bad rap. There's all these myths around codependency. People do not see themselves. So obviously for me as the therapist, you can see my conundrum. How can I help my clients if they do not see themselves in the problem? And so codependency, according to me, is when we are overly invested in the feeling states, the outcomes, the situations, the circumstances, the finances, the careers of the people in our lives to the detriment of our own internal peace. Could be our financial well-being, could be our psychological or emotional well-being. So making the distinction, it's not just I'm concerned about my friend. My friend calls me and is in a crisis. I'm compassionately concerned. That's not what we're talking about. When you are a codependent, and I'll talk about the high-functioning piece in a minute, you feel responsible for your friend's crisis. It is now your crisis. It is not your friend's crisis anymore. Now you are putting down everything you are doing. You are underlining stuff in a book. You are texting the person you know who works at Sloan Kettering. You are in action to solve the problem. So when I added high functioning to codependency, because with my clients, the irony is that the more capable you are, the less codependency looks like codependency, but it's still codependency. So we're still suffering in the same way. It just doesn't look like that because the external package looks like we have it all together. I don't know what my clients thought. I mean, some would be like, well, I'm not like waiting at home for like my debting partner to come home after they've spent all the rent money, right? I'm not that pathetic person. That's like a 1950s idea of what codependency is. But I did really feel like codependency itself needed an upgrade, and that even the Melody Beattie Codependent No More definition and all of that, because so much of that had to do with being involved with an addict. People would be like, well, I'm not enabling an alcoholic. I'm like, you don't have to be codependent. So let's look at the foundation of any kind of codependency, garden variety or high functioning. And it's a covert or overt desire, attempt, or bid to control other people's outcomes.
Yeah, I often see it as taking on the pain of another person's problem and then resolving that pain for them and thinking somehow that we've saved them or made the situation better, not realizing that they didn't learn, because pain is often a really great teacher, but it's often at the cost of so much when we do that.
Absolutely. And I think that, there's something very addicting about putting on the cape. And, there's a lot of savior complex happening. There's a lot of hyper helping. There's a lot of auto advice giving that goes along with being a codependent, a high functioning codependent in particular, where we're the people that everybody comes to for things because we got it together. So when I added high functioning to codependency, my clients could all sort of raise their hand and say, I'm the problem, it's me, not to quote Taylor Swift, but I will. And without shame, realizing I am exhausted, I am burnt out, and I do feel kind of resentful because this is where this behavior ultimately leads us.
In fact, I remember when I was challenging myself around this type of behavior, telling myself that when someone's asking a question in the grocery store in the next aisle over, they're not directly asking you. Don't go find them and help them out.
Totally. Oh, so many scenarios. It's like ridiculous. Or like on a plane,
I know.
I can't wait to move my seat for you guys so you can sit together. I can't wait to help you with directions. I can't. And what'll happen is people on the interwebs will be like, well, Terry, maybe I'm just nice. Ever think of that? I'm like, listen, buddy, if you can't not do it, it is not you being nice. It is a compulsion like any other compulsion.
You're right. You're not in control anymore, then, are you?
No, you are not. So let's not confuse or conflate niceness with control.
Yeah.
Because this is what we're talking about. People are like, well, how do I know if I'm caring or controlling? I'm like, well, let's start with taking a resentment inventory, because your resentment is like an absolute gem of a GPS to bring you to where something needs your attention in your life. Where are you over-functioning, over-giving, over-controlling a lot of times is what it brings us to. We feel underappreciated so much of the time for our grade A advice that we give people. A lot of times they haven't asked us for it, but still, we took the time to give it to them. And we're like mad that people don't appreciate it. Like you said, the person in the aisle, right? It's not like, wow, thank you for walking over 2 aisles and helping me, even though I didn't really need your help,
Right. Now, those that know me know that I really struggle with this term because my platform is all about narcissistic abuse, toxic relationships. And one of the things I know that happens to a lot of survivors in these bad relationships with narcissists is that we start to function for the narcissist. That the narcissist is actually looking for us to pick up and stabilize their under-functioning psyche, and we end up augmenting them in all these sort of ways, so that it's not so much we walked into these relationships codependent, but to survive the relationships, we then start to pick up a lot of these tendencies. Have you heard of the term echoism? I just had Lynn Strathdy on. She's a new up-and-coming social media creator, also a therapist, been doing a lot of research on echoism, which is really the opposite of narcissism from the story, the Greek mythology of Narcissus and Echo. I just had her on a few weeks ago, which is why it's really fresh in my mind. She sees echoism sort of the way to capture all of this, of people-pleasing, fawning, and codependency that we're really trying to talk about, a survival mechanism that some of us learned where we defer our sense of self in the benefit of other people. I struggled with codependency for a couple of reasons. One is I struggled because the definition seemed to be so squishy. I mean, you go out and research it, there's lots of different ways that people kind of try to describe it. And for the very reason that you just mentioned, which is typically it's been seen as it's a woman who can't help herself. She's sort of this pathetic, over-functioning person who's intrusively involved in other people's business. And this is the other part that I don't think is universal. She's doing it so that she can look like the savior or the martyr. And so people get resentful that she inserts herself. So that's why I've resisted it for all those reasons.
But there's so many different versions. Like when you think about high-functioning codependency, we come in all shapes and sizes. So you have the more overt, right? You have the extroverts, you have the introverts, right? The real question is, where are we crossing boundaries? Because that's the question, right? Where it's interesting. My first book, Boundary Boss, so much of that book was about how do we establish boundaries and withhold them, uphold them, make people respect them, understanding the difference between a preference and a deal breaker. Like there was so much about boundaries, but a lot of it was, how do I protect myself? In this book, I talk about boundaries from a different lens, because if you're a high-functioning codependent, a lot of times you are inadvertently the boundary trampler, fixing other people's problems. Like if we would say, what traits and behaviors of a high-functioning codependent? One of the top ones would be feeling compelled to fix other people's problems, like immediately. And for me, I was completely indiscriminate. It could be my mailman. I didn't care. I don't care who you were. You had a problem. There was not a problem that I couldn't fix, that I wouldn't try to fix, that I felt was for me to fix. Going above and beyond, doing things for people a lot of times that they can and should be doing for themselves, doing things for people that they may not have asked you to do, but we're doing them because we think they should be done. I'm getting kind of pissed when people don't take our grade A advice that we so lovingly gave them. They want to talk about the same problem the next week when we already fixed it last week. You're like, what the hell is wrong with you? Just do what I said and it would all be fine.
Yeah.
Feeling a little bitter, feeling a little resentment, feeling a little underappreciated. The auto advice giving is one of the behaviors. The self-sacrificing, where when you're an HFC, high functioning codependent, you're kind of always willing to take one for the team. We're a little bit like, whatever, it's not a big deal. It's fine. Just you guys do what you got to do. I'll stay back, or I'll take the Uber, or I'll figure out the check, or whatever the thing is. Auto-accommodating. So this is a behavior that I discovered, this behavioral pattern. I certainly saw it in my clients as well, but I discovered it within myself. I was at a hair salon getting my hair done. It was busy as hell. And they put like a mask on my hair. So I'm like laying in a sink, but not like using a sink, So you're going to lay there for 20 minutes. And now suddenly the sink line is starting to back up. And I'm getting like anxious and more anxious while people are waiting. And I'm like, I could just move. Like, I don't even need a fucking sink. I could be sitting on that chair. They could use the sink. Like, what are they doing? I'm now figuring out, I finally call over the assistant, like, hey, I could move. She's like, yeah, bitch, we do this every Saturday, Terry. We got it. Like, they were like, we're good. But I had such an epiphany around that. When you're a high-functioning codependent, you do not know how to stay on your own side of the street. You feel like the whole neighborhood is your neighborhood to clean up, yours to manage, yours to control. Like even that, some people would say, well, you were just being nice and being thoughtful. No, I wasn't. I was trying to avoid conflict that wasn't mine to avoid. I was anxious for what happened in my childhood. This is not being nice. This is being controlling and trying to control everything. So anyway, the auto-accommodating can happen in anywhere. It can happen at work. It can happen where you're doing more than your share. Maybe you're on a team with other people. But seeing a problem and just feeling like it's on you to fix it, that's auto-accommodating. Auto-accommodating a difficult person in your family. They're going to be over. I had these two uncles who didn't talk to each other because they're two Canadians. Anyway, so I would have them over and I would, in my mind, I'd be like, okay, so Uncle Jimmy drinks this, Uncle Bobby drinks this. I'm going to make sure they don't sit near each other. I'll have my sister Kathy is assigned to Uncle Jimmy. My sister Tam is assigned to Uncle, like literally marionettes, like I'm just puppeteering rather than telling two grown adults, if you two idiots can't get along for 2 hours at my house for Christmas, then don't fucking come. Eventually I got to that point much more respectfully. But the point is, it never entered my mind to expect them to act like grown-ups. It was on me to figure out, how do I avert disaster at Christmas by controlling the situation? And that also sort of rolls into what I deem anticipatory planning, right? You're going to be with rough people. You figure out what to do not to have there be any problems, because so much of the time when you're a high-functioning codependent, the main thing you want is peace. We just don't want there to be any problems. We just want to have peace in the relationships, peace in the backyard, peace in the valley, peace everywhere. And that's what we're trying to do. In the process, there's two things that happen readily. We are overfunctioning, which, as I like to say, when I was in my 20s, I could inspire a perfectly capable boyfriend to become an underfunctioner in like 2 weeks or less, right? You know what I'm saying, Kerry?
Yeah.
I know you do. Where you're just like, I got it. Because I did. But that does not create an interdependent relationship that is stoking the fires of codependency when I'm overfunctioning and the other person is underfunctioning. And then you have more cynical aspects of that, which is feigned incompetence. We've got all of the emotional labor that we're doing. We have people doing crap wrong because they know it'll drive us crazy. We'll be like, forget it. I'll just do it myself. It's easier, which is also an affirmation for high-functioning codependence. And then the second thing that happens readily is a certain amount of self-abandonment, that even though we're doing sort of what we want with the controlling aspect, we're really not, and it's exhausting.
Yeah, that really hit me when I read that in your book. That self-abandonment was like, ugh, yeah. What I see is there's a common assumption that everybody is born like this. I kind of, as I was reading through this, and by the way, I love the way you laid the book out. I love the way that you included gems in there for people to take away. You ask assessment questions. You even have a dig deeper section in the back for people to take it further. What a great book. Thank you for that. So one of the things that I struggle with in general is that I see there's people who are naturally that way. They're just naturally giving. They see it as part of who they are. It's even part of their integrity. And I can even picture those individuals that I've met in life. I also, though, when it comes into an unhealthy relationship dynamic, which I survived one, that the fascinating part was that there was research done by Sandra Bound in 2014 at Purdue University that looked at the personalities of women. It was primarily women, this is why she looked at women who got into a pathological love relationship. 2/3 of them had no history of a bad childhood or traumatic background. It was that they had two personality traits, that they were overly agreeable and overly conscientious. And you could see, based on those traits, how that individual could be trained or groomed into overfunctioning for a very scary, intimidating, even threatening kind of a person who is making her or his life a mess just by the chaos and drama that they're creating. So that's one of the thoughts I had, is that it's not always that we're raised this way, that sometimes it's what we've learned to survive, but that we have these vulnerabilities that get us into these relationships.
Yes, but let's unpack that a little, because when you really think about, most of us were raised and praised to be self-abandoning codependents. If you were raised as a girl, where's my happy girl? Turn your frown around. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. People love to tell you about their friend Betty, who would give, you'd love her. She'd give anyone the shirt off her back. Keep your effing shirt on, Betty. Like, why are we stripping for anybody? Like, why is that praised? So the thing is, you don't have to have an abuse background to be vulnerable to the very sneaky, tricky ways of, cluster B personality disorders, including narcissists, right?
Right.
You don't. You can be an empath. You can be a highly sensitive person. And you could also just be a good girl through and through. And that we don't want to confront. We give the benefit of the doubt. I find that women who fall into this category in particular, we suffer from positive projection, where we project our positive traits and qualities onto others, even though we do not have proof that those people possess those positive traits and qualities. So part of my work with women and helping people get into recovery, because this is all we're hoping for with high-functioning codependency. It's just like any other recovery. There's no curing it. You just get into recovery, is slowing down, right? When we are too polite and we let a narcissist accelerate a time frame, the timeline of, we've been on 3 dates and they're like, do you want to go to a wedding with me in 2040? You're like, what? How are we talking about so long from now, right? Or next summer, why don't we? All of this future pacing to create security. You have the love bombing. You have all of these ways of just hooking us, hook, line, and sinker. So again, I even write this in Too Much in this book, and it's the same thing with the father wound. This is a book I'm writing right now. People think to have a father, like you needed, like it had to be like a horribly abusive situation. Not true at all. Not to mention the patriarchy is the OG bad daddy right there.
Yes,
right?
For sure.
So we all have father wounds to a degree. And this is the same thing, that we've been socialized in such a way that we've been praised to not protect ourselves. We've been praised to not ask questions. We've been praised to be agreeable, be nice. I mean, we've been, all of us, inducted into the cult of nice. It's more important to be perceived as being nice when I was growing up. Definitely more important than actually being nice, for sure. Being perceived as being nice. And to be thought of as being rude, asking questions is like rude. Is like, like look at all the labels that women get put on them. If we fight back, if we question, if we go, what are you saying? Then they're like, oh, she must be on her period. Like, we know the misogyny, listen, shit is not new. This is the way the world has been. Is it better today than it was 50 years ago-ish? I mean, I don't know. We've taken some steps back in the past, 10 years for sure. But what you're saying, I think, is really important. And that let's not make it pathological, right? All I care about is helping women become empowered in their lives and in their relationships. So if people reject, and I even say this in the beginning of this book, I'm like, hey, if you don't identify with being codependent, don't even worry about it. It doesn't matter. What I care about is behavior. What I care about is how you feel. What I care about is your nervous system. Are you in a relationship where you feel safe? Are you in a relationship where you're walking on eggshells? Are you in a relationship where you put your head down at night and you're anxious? I mean, if you look at the Love Lab, right, you look at Dr. What's-His-Face and his wife.
Yeah, Gottman's.
Yeah, that have been doing just such amazing work for just so many decades. We're just so blessed to be alive while they're alive. Thank you to them. But, all of the studies that they've done where they have the EKG or EEG things on people sitting next to their partners, and how in relationships that are the disaster relationships, just sitting next to the person, their heart rate is like going through the ceiling.
Yeah.
And people live like this forever and ever. And being in a relationship with a narcissist, you can never get too comfortable And you do. That's why it's a cycle of abuse. You get comfortable-ish, but then the cycle begins again.
Yeah, in fact, my new motto is that I realized that I was sacrificing personal safety for connection, and that never to do that again, to always ask myself, it's like almost like to me, it's like a fence, the top of a fence edge, to sit between those two places, those two poles, to think, am I trying to preserve the connection too much, to preserve the relationship, to stay in a relationship, to have a sense of belonging? Or am I sacrificing myself and my safety in order to keep this relationship alive? And man, when I look back, I've sacrificed safety way, way too much in my life. Yeah, even the comment of positive projection, and future pacing. Really powerful ways to put that. You're exactly right. And I remember the degree of the hypervigilance and just the lack of safety I felt sitting. This man terrified me. I'm living with a guy who terrified me. And how many people are existing in that reality for long periods of time where they're just trying to get on a little bit of at least like a little normal, a little less stress instead of like comfortable and feeling happy and being able to be expansive. It's terrible. It's terrible.
I remember after one particularly not good relationship that I had where I was afraid of the person. And it was more of an emotional fear. And it was like jealousy. And it was just a codependent relationship, sort of in your very typical way of like, you're out with your friends and the person's texting you a million times and being like, I don't like it when you go away with your friend. Like all the, isolating you from friends and family, not wanting to share you with anyone, all the crap. And I made a real commitment to myself. I was like, I will literally never be in a relationship with someone who I fear again. And I never did. I was in my late 20s and I was like, that is the one and only time I'm doing that, because it was so exhausting and not joyful. You're like, wow, this could be my whole life where I feel responsible for this person and I'm fixing them and they get anxious at an event and now we have a sign that they say to me, so then we leave the event like, oh my God, no, please.
Yeah. I have so many questions. There's angles I would have loved to pursue today, like what does it look like in men? Because I think men have their own version of it. It's a little different than women. But what I'd love to do in the podcast extra is if somebody is resonating with this and then they would say to you, Terri, the relationship's not safe. It's not that I don't want to have boundaries. It's that, and this is a word I picked up from you that I love. Boundary bully. I swear, Terri, I'm using that. That's a great way to capture that.
Right.
But I'm living with a boundary bully. So every time that I try to set a boundary, it just goes disastrously wrong. Yeah. Obviously, this person says, I know I need to get out, but I'm not in a position for lots of reasons that I can't right now leave. So let's jump over and talk about what to do in that situation. But where can people find you as well as find the book Too Much? How can they learn more about you?
All right. Well, I have a little present for you because we talked about a lot, but there's more to talk about. So I have an HFC toolkit that you guys can access. Just go to terricole.com/HFC. And there's like a video and there's a downloadable thing to just sort of walk you further along this path. I have a beautiful community that people can join, which if you get the toolkit, it'll be on there too. Okay. I hang out mostly on Instagram, just at Terri Cole. I have a podcast I've had for the past 10 years called The Terri Cole Show. So if you're into this podcast, you'd probably be into my podcast. Or terricole.com is where everything is.
All right. That's fabulous. Thank you so much. This was a very rich conversation. And I'd love to have you back sometime. We can talk more about these topics. So thank you so much, Terri. Well, that's a wrap for this week's episode. Are you following me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube? You can find me at Kerry McAvoy, Ph.D. Or you can learn more about me and my resources such as the Toxic Free Relationship Club at kerrymcavoyphd.com. And I'll see you back here next week.